"50 states, 50 eerie stories, 7 levels." This iceberg is an eerie mix of some of the wildest things to happen in each state of the US. From the bizarre cases to violent crimes, I fished out some of the most horrific stories out there. Let's start at the tip. Level 1. Nebraska, Curly Green. In the state of Nebraska, the story of Walter Green, aka Walter Curly Green, is one that still confounds many. He lived in Omaha and led a pretty low-key life till he passed away from a heart attack in 1978. That's when news got out that he had left behind a hidden wealth in real estate, stocks, bonds, and a coin collection. He even owned the building he lived in. It all added up to over $200,000, and Walter hadn't left a will. He was also very private, and nobody knew about his past, his family, or where the money could have come from. Without a will or any known heirs, a wild search began. Investigators combed through records and chatted with friends. They found out his parents were Harry Albert Green and Anne Marin Green. He had also mentioned a brother who was killed in a shootout. Walter had also received postcards from someone in Brooklyn, New York, but none of them have been successfully traced. One intriguing detail was a mysterious wreath sent to his funeral signed by Mrs. Joe Greener from Denver, but no one has been able to find her. Since the story of Curly's fortune got out, hundreds of people claim to be his heirs, but none have been able to prove it. Today, Curly's fortune remains the largest unclaimed heir in Nebraska's history. Idaho, Buffalo Cave Torso. In August 26, 1979, a family was out hunting for arrowheads at Buffalo Cave, Idaho. Instead, they found a headless torso buried in burlap, opening one of the oldest ever solved by forensics genealogy. Over the years, an arm, 2 legs, and a hand were found in the same cave. John Doe was said to have been 40 when he met his end, and that was put at 5 years before. But identifying who he was would take a few more decades. Finally, in 2019, DNA technology caught up with this cold case. He was identified as Henry Walt Lovelace, an outlaw who had dropped off the map in 1916. Lovelace was known for bootlegging, counterfeiting, and breaking out of prison. He also went by 3 other aliases: Walter Currens, Walter Cairns, and Charles Smith. Using news articles and wanted posters, investigators slowly pieced together what had happened to him. On May 5, 1916, Lovelace added a much more serious crime to his records when he took the life of his second wife, Agnes Octavia Lovelace. Weeks after being arrested, Lovelace escaped from his jail cell using a saw he had hidden in his shoe, and he was never seen again. For 6 decades, his escape was seen as the story of a fugitive on the run. But what the police didn't know was that shortly after his daring escape, Lovelace was killed and his body was cut up. Some say he might have been killed in retaliation for his wife's murder, but the case remains a mystery, and his head was never recovered. Indiana, Odin Fire Poltergeist. Back in 1940, the small town of Odin, Indiana, made headlines for something pretty bizarre. 28 fires happening on the same day at the same house. The 2-story farmhouse was home to the Hacklers, William, Minnie, and their 7 children who lived a fairly quiet life. But one day in April of 1941, just after 8 a.m., the peace and quiet of the home was disturbed when a strip of wallpaper in an upstairs bedroom had caught fire. The Odin Fire Brigade promptly put it out. But when they tried to find the cause, they were left scratching their heads. The house had not been wired for electricity, and there was no old chimney when they tore the plaster away. Nonetheless, they left satisfied that they had put it out and left the home. The fire brigade hadn't even made it back to town when they learned there was another fire from the wallpaper. For the next couple of hours, the fire brigade was camped outside the Hacklers' home as fire after fire started in the most bizarre places. Inside a mattress in a downstairs bedroom, a book burned up from the inside out, a calendar went up in smoke, a fire started in an overall hung on the door. In all, there were 28 fires. That night, the Hackler's family, fearing for their lives, carried their beds outside and slept under a tree. The house was later torn down and the salvaged lumber was used to build another home. This turned out to be the right decision because since then there haven't been any more mysterious fires. Today, it remains one of Indiana's unsolved mysteries, and there have been several conspiracies about what happened at the farmhouse that April day. Some say it had something to do with a strong magnetic field. Others claim that flammable gases had gotten into the home. Some believe the mysterious fire was the work of a poltergeist, but there are still no answers. Mississippi, Phantom Barber of Pascagoula. One night in 1942, a young girl in the convent of Our Lady of Victory in the small town of Pascagoula, Mississippi, watched in fear as a short, fat man in a white sweatshirt crept away from her. In his hands, he had snippets of her hair. He had also cut hair from two other young girls in the convent. It was something that had been happening all across town. The Phantom Barber, as he came to be known, would slice open window screens in the dead of night and chop off bits of their hair before making his getaway. One woman said that something like chloroform had been passed over their faces to keep them sleeping, but apart from a few inches of missing hair, they were not otherwise harmed. News headlines were filled with stories about the Phantom Barber, and there were whispers that the hair was being used in demonic rituals. Worried parents started to nail their windows shut and would sleep in the children's rooms. At the same time, other crimes were happening around town. Mr. and Mrs. Terrell Heidelberg were attacked with an iron pipe as they slept. Someone was also breaking into homes by cutting into screens. Then they would scatter the home, tossing around clothes and dishes. The police worried that he was escalating and ramped up their search. Finally, in late July, William A. Dolan, a 57-year-old German chemist, was arrested after human hair was found in his backyard along with hair shears. Dolan was a Nazi sympathizer, and the police believed that he was trying to undermine the morale of American workers helping with the war effort. The police also linked him to the attack on the Heidelbergs. Some months earlier, Dolan had problems with the local magistrate who just happened to be Heidelberg's father. Dolan maintained his innocence, but was found guilty of attempted murder and sentenced to 10 years behind bars. He would later be released early after the case was reviewed. This turn in the case had led many to question if Dolan was the Phantom Barber of Pascagoula at all, and as far as many are concerned, the real Phantom Barber got away with it. Level 2. Washington. Severed feet. In 2007, visitors to the Washington beach began to find much more than shells. They began to see tennis shoes, but not just any shoes. These shoes contained something grim, severed feet. And there wasn't just one of them. Since 2007, more than 20 hiking or running shoes have washed ashore along the coast of the Salish Sea that stretched from the U.S. state of Washington all the way to British Columbia. Each of them had a decaying foot inside. Speculation began to spread about where the feet could have come from. A serial murderer on the loose who had something against feet, or migrants who drowned as they crossed the ocean looking for a better life. Others believe the shoes were the last remains of the victims of a plane crash. But in 2017, while news of shoes with severed feet is still morbid, like when a foot was found with a whole leg bone still attached, the authorities aren't worried anymore that there is a mad killer on the loose with a fetish for human feet, because forensic scientists and investigators have solved the case. Once a body gets into the water and hits the sea floor, it becomes food for ocean life like crabs and lobsters, who immediately go for the softest places, like the ankles, and begin to eat right through them. Sneakers made from 2007 and beyond have become more buoyant, so once a foot is separated, the sneaker begins to float. The thick texture of the footwear is also not palatable to predators, inadvertently protecting the foot. When it gets to the surface, the waves of the Salish Sea push it to shore. In the end, what seemed like a chilling mystery is a story of lost lives, tragic accidents, and those who took their lives in the Salish Sea. Delaware, the missing botanist. In 1986, a chilling mystery unfolded in Blackbird State Forest, Delaware, when the body of 28-year-old Jane Marie Pritchard was discovered. She had been shot dead. Jane was pursuing her master's degree at the University of Maryland and had been visiting the forest for 3 years to research a particular native plant. But this time, her academic pursuits would end in horror. On September 20th, 1986, a couple enjoying a walk stumbled on Jane's partially clothed body just off a trail near her equipment. She had been killed by a shot in the back. The police had a timeline of Jane's morning. By 7 a.m., she had driven into the forest. For the next 3 hours, she kept a minute-by-minute recording of the plant she was studying. Then, just before 10 a.m., the recording stopped. The police believed that when she had been killed, there were many hunters in the forest that day, and so the police suspected it was an accidental shooting, but they would later rule it out. Then, a janitor who was hunting squirrels in the forest that day claimed to have seen another hunter near Jane before her estimated time of death. He worked with a sketch artist, and the public finally got a glimpse of their prime suspect. But as they had more interviews with the squirrel hunter, the investigators began to find inconsistencies in his story. Convinced he was their guy, the janitor was arrested and charged with Jane's. But when police compared his DNA to hairs they had found on the crime scene, it was not a match. The man was released, and the case went cold. Despite several attempts to bring her family justice, Jane's murder has remained unsolved, and no one else has ever been arrested in connection to her death. Pennsylvania, the Great Smog of Donora. On October 26, 1948, in the small town of Donora, Pennsylvania, what began as a typical autumn day quickly spiraled into a nightmare. A thick, toxic smog had rolled in, turning the once breathable air into a suffocating blanket of gray smog. Thousands gasped for air, and hospitals were hit with waves of calls and patients who were having difficulty breathing. Residents with respiratory or cardiac conditions were advised to evacuate the city. But between the heavy smog and heavy traffic out there, they couldn't find a way out. However, this was not a random act of nature. Donora was a town known for its steel mills and a zinc smelting plant that had been spewing toxic chemicals into the air for decades. As early as 1920, residents had been compensated for the damages caused by this relentless pollution by the owner of the zinc plant, Zinc Works. But this was the first time any deaths had been linked directly to them. That fateful day, there was already a heavy fog in Donora when the steel mills and smelting plants began releasing the toxic chemicals into the air. The thick fog trapped the chemicals close to the ground, slowly poisoning the residents. For the next couple of days, panicked residents struggled to breathe. Meanwhile, the plant kept operating, releasing more and more fumes. It wasn't till the 5th day that the plant shut down operations. A rainfall arrived, clearing the air and lifting the fog, but it was too late for 20 people. It was from this disaster that changes in air quality regulations, like the passing of the 1955 Clean Air Act, a change that only happened after the deaths of many. Kansas, Randy Leach. On the morning of April 16, 1988, 17-year-old Randy Leach borrowed his mother's gray 1985 Dodge to attend a graduation party in rural Leavenworth County, Kansas. He arrived at the party all right, but he never returned. Nobody had seen him leave the party, but neither Randy or his mother's car were ever seen again. Soon, theories began to spread about what could have happened. One story was that he had been abducted and executed by a satanic cult. At the time, the U.S. was in the midst of the satanic panic, and many variations of this story spread. But the man who said this turned out to have been on drugs. Another story was that he had overdosed, but several partygoers insisted that Randy did not appear to have been drinking or taken any drugs. The most popular theory was that Randy had accidentally driven off a bridge into a creek and the car was swept away. But with nothing much to go on, the case went cold. 33 years later, in 2021, the story of Randy's disappearance became widespread after sonar from a fishing boat picked up a vehicle submerged in a lake. By then, Randy's father had passed on after a lifetime searching for his son. Many were convinced that Randy had been found and the rest of his family could finally find closure. But when the car was pulled out, there was no body inside, and it wasn't the right model. A $25,000 reward has been offered for information that could lead to discovering Randy's fate. Age progression software has also been used to create an image of what he might look like today, just in case Randy is still somewhere out there. Colorado, the Black Forest Haunting. In 1990, Stephen and Beth Lee moved into their dream home with their 2 young sons. It was a 2-story log home on a 5-acre property in the Black Forest region of Colorado Springs. But what was supposed to begin as a joyful new chapter quickly turned into a nightmare filled with strange occurrences. Within weeks, the Lees reported bizarre phenomena, lights flickering, strange sounds echoing, and even the unsettling sensation of being watched. Their 2 sons claimed to see shadowy figures, strange lights, and even have lights and appliances turn on and off by themselves. There also seemed to be chemical odors that burned their eyes and throats. Convinced that someone was just trying to scare them, Stephen Lee spent $30,000 installing a high-tech security system with all the bells and whistles, video surveillance, motion detectors, silent alarms, you name it. Yet, when the system was set off, capturing light streaks, strange shadows, and even haunting translucent faces, no one was ever found to have triggered them. For the next 4 years, the family lived in this nightmare. There were 62 unexplained break-ins, and the police visited them 45 times, but never caught anyone. By now, Stephen was convinced that they were indeed haunted and had over 3,000 photographs and 400 videotapes backing this up, making it one of the most well-documented and mysterious hauntings in the United States. The family even contacted the paranormal investigation show Sightings. They learned that their home housed numerous spirits, including a malevolent presence. A renowned psychic who visited the house revealed connections to the Lees' past, including a friend named Howard, whose son had tragically died. To this day, the Lee house remains a hotspot for paranormal activity, with doors opening on their own and ghostly apparitions still making their presence known. It's been said that the family has accepted the home and has made peace with living with their otherworldly house guests, but there are reports that they just might have had enough and sold it. Kentucky, unsolved mystery. On the night of April 3, 2004, 23-year-old Alonzo Brooks attended a large house party with a group of friends at a farmhouse on the outskirts of Lansing, Kansas. When he didn't return home that night, his family reported him missing. Alonzo's family was convinced something sinister had happened, especially when they learned the friends he had gone to the party had left before him, leaving him with no way to get home. The police searched the area around the farmhouse, including a nearby creek, but they came up empty. A month after Alonzo's disappearance, his family organized a search of the same area. Barely an hour in, Alonzo's body was discovered in the creek. It was clear he had been there for a long time, leading many to wonder if a thorough search of the area had been done by the police. It didn't help that they also couldn't determine a cause of death. The question about what happened to Alonzo stalled till the case was reopened in 2019. Alonzo's body was exhumed and his death was ruled a homicide. They also worked out why the police hadn't found Alonzo's body during their initial search. It had rained in the area and the creek had risen, hiding Alonzo's body. With fresh eyes on the case, the police are now convinced that his murder was a hate crime motivated by racial bias. Apart from being only one of 3 African-American men at the party, witnesses have said racial slurs were used. There were also rumors about some drunken white men who had hated seeing Brooke there. The FBI has taken over the case, but even with a $100,000 reward on the line for anyone with information about what happened to Alonzo that night, 20 years later, his death is still unsolved. Louisiana, Voodoo Queen of New Orleans. In the state of Louisiana, there's a 200-year-old cemetery called St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. This cemetery is the final resting place for many notable people in early New Orleans, including the voodoo queen of New Orleans, Marie Laveau. Born in the French quarters of New Orleans in 1801, Marie was a free woman of color. Though she worked as a hairdresser, Marie gained popularity in the practice of voodoo through a curious mix of African religion, Catholicism, and Native American religious practices. In time, she came to be known as one of the most powerful voodoo priestesses. There are tales about Maria performing rituals at Congo Square that would gather crowds in the hundreds. Marie also sold charms combining herbs, bones, hair, nails, and dirt. People from all walks of life, both white and black, paid for her advice, healing, protection, and intervention. There was a rumor that she could even stay a prisoner's execution. Marie lived for 80 years and died on June 15, 1881. Even in death, her legend remains. Her tomb at St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 has become a sacred site where curious tourists and occultists troop to leave offerings in the hope of having their wishes answered. Many of them say that they still feel her spirit. Arkansas, Morgan Nick. On June 9, 1995, 6-year-old Morgan Nick was one of several children at a Little League game in Alma, Arkansas. She was seated beside her mom, Colleen, in the bleachers. As the evening skies darkened, fireflies began to dot the field. Unable to resist, Morgan ran off to chase them with her friends as the game continued. Nightfall came, and the game came to an end. Colleen went to where Morgan was meant to be playing with her friends, but she wasn't there. Morgan had been abducted. The prime suspect was a white male who had been seen in the parking lot driving a red truck with a white camper shell, a car that vanished around the same time Morgan did. The vehicle description led the police to Billy Jack Lynx, but he told them he had no idea about the 6-year-old's abduction. His red truck also didn't have a camper shell. With nothing else to go on, the case went cold and would remain that way for more than 20 years. In 2019, the case was reopened. New eyes on the case were convinced that Billy and his red truck were still the prime suspects, especially when they discovered that just 2 months after Morgan's disappearance, Billy had been arrested and found guilty of abducting an 11-year-old girl. This was just 8 miles from where Morgan vanished. Linking Morgan's disappearance to Billy meant they had to find the smoking gun, the red truck. Over the past 24 years, it had been sold many times, but by some miracle, investigators tracked it down. After sweeping it for evidence, they found blonde hair strands, hair that would be linked to someone in Morgan's family. Billy had abducted Morgan, but justice would never be served. Billy had died behind bars for an unrelated crime in 2020 at the age of 72. And Morgan's body has never been found. Level 3. Wyoming, the first case on unsolved mysteries. In 1982, 35-year-old advertising executive Don Kemp sold his things, left his fiancée, and moved to Wyoming after an accident that left him with debilitating injuries. He planned to write a book about Abraham Lincoln's assassination in Wyoming. He began to describe himself as a prophet and spoke about leading a cult relating to the Lincoln assassination in Upper Wyoming, but that would never happen. On November 16th, his car was found along the interstate in the Wyoming prairie. The engine was running, the radio was playing, the doors were open, and personal belongings were scattered around, but there was no sign of Don. Just a single set of footprints in the snow from the roadside into the empty prairie. The footprints led them to a barn where they found some of Kemp's socks and a pile of sticks arranged to start a fire. There was also a duffel bag with laundry soap, clothes, and a teapot, but no Don. 3 days into the search, a blizzard swept through the area, making it impossible for them to continue. But this time, the police were convinced that if Don was still out there, he would die from the cold, and they called off the search. But then, 5 months after his disappearance, there were 2 instances where witnesses claimed to have seen Don. Once at an Abraham Lincoln exhibition and another time at a bar. A close friend also received 6 calls from Dawn. She was out of the country at the time, so all 6 were recorded on her answering machine. In the calls, Dawn sounded panicked and desperate to reach her. He also gave her a phone number to reach him on, but when she dialed the number, the man said Dawn was out. The police traced the line to a trailer in Wyoming. The man who lived there said he did not know Dawn or receive any calls. For 3 years, questions about what became of Dawn remained. Then, in 1986, hunters stumbled on human remains just a few miles from where Dawn's car had been left. It would later be identified as Don Kemp. There were no signs of foul play, so the police concluded that he likely froze to death as they originally said, but they couldn't explain why his body hadn't been found during the earlier searches, especially since his remains hadn't been hidden or buried. They also couldn't explain the phone calls. Many believe that Don might have found out something important while researching for his book about Abraham Lincoln's assassination and had been silenced. Rumor has it that Don's research notes were stolen, and what's even creepier, those who took them met untimely ends under suspicious circumstances. Maine. Her skull was kept as evidence. In the quaint town of Bucksport, Maine, there's a chilling unsolved mystery that has lingered for more than a century. The story revolves around Sarah Ware, a 52-year-old divorcee whose life was brutally cut short the night of September 17, 1898. She was making her rounds collecting payments for the odd jobs she did when she vanished without a trace. For 2 weeks, the community was ill at ease. Then, Sarah's body was found, her head so badly damaged that it fell away when investigators tried to lift her. The prime suspect was a man notorious for his violent temper, William Trewargy. Neighbors said that he could have been Sarah's last stop during her collection that night. After witnesses came forward claiming William had paid them to help move Sarah's body, the smoking gun, a blood-stained hammer with William's initials engraved on it. Yet, even with evidence and a suspect, William would not stand trial for years. To make things worse, by July of 1902, the weapon mysteriously disappeared, and key witnesses recanted their testimony. In a twist of fate, Trewargy was acquitted, leaving the truth buried alongside Sarah. But one key bit of evidence was kept: Sarah's broken skull. For 8 decades, it was locked up and forgotten at Ellsworth Courthouse till courthouse clerks found it. Even then, they did not let go of Sarah's skull. Several petitions later, in 1998, 1 century after Sarah was attacked, her skull was finally laid to rest in the same cemetery, but in a separate grave from where her body is located. A macabre end for a woman who never got justice. West Virginia. Mammy Thurman. In West Virginia, there's folklore about a spectral figure, a woman in outdated clothing, wandering the highway near the 22nd Mine Road. It's believed to be the ghost of Mammy Thurman. Her tragic story begins in 1932. The young woman was last seen collecting payments one night, but she never returned home. Instead, her body was discovered days later on what is now known as 22 Mine Road, with her throat cut and gunshot wounds. The police ruled out robbery because next to the body was a diamond engagement ring, a silver wedding band, and a purse with $9. The investigation led them to the home of Mammy's landlord, Harry Robertson. There they found bloody rags and a razor. Harry's handyman, Charles Stevenson, an African-American who also lived in the house. Charles was convicted and would spend the rest of his life behind bars. But many believe that Charles was just a scapegoat. There are rumors that Mammy had an affair with her landlord, and they had a falling out. There are also whispers of affairs with powerful men in the town, but even though Charles maintained that he wasn't the actual killer, he never revealed who the real killer was. So the mystery of what happened to Mammy that night remains. And also, no one knows where she was buried. After Mammy, there were stories from coal truck drivers going along 22 Mine Road who picked up a woman in outdated clothes who would vanish into thin air moments later. Ohio, Amy Mihaljevic. It was mid-October 1989 when 10-year-old fifth grader Amy Mihaljevic answered a phone call in her Bay Village home in Ohio. The caller was a man who told her he needed help buying a gift for Amy's mother. The trusting girl innocently agreed to meet him at the Bay Square Shopping Center on October 27th. Little did she know, that decision would change everything. That fateful day, two of Amy's classmates saw a white male in his 30s approach her. He placed a hand on her shoulder and led her away through the parking lot. This was the last time she was seen. That night, when Amy didn't return home, her frantic parents called the police, igniting what would become one of Ohio's largest searches. Tragically, the search ended in heartbreak. Months later, on February 8, 1990, a jogger stumbled upon Amy's decomposing body in a remote field 50 miles from where she was last seen. She had died from a knife wound. The police believed her body was dumped there shortly after her abduction. Missing from Amy's belongings were her turquoise horsehead earrings and black ankle boots, suggesting her killer may have kept trophies. Time passed, and news got out about two other young girls who received the same type of calls that Amy had around the same time she had. It became clear there was a problem. New York, Love Canal disaster. In the 1970s, residents in the Love Canal neighborhood of New York began to suffer from inexplicable illnesses, epilepsy, asthma, and migraines. Women were having high rates of miscarriages, and many of the babies who were born suffered birth defects. No one knew why all of this was happening in the growing city till 1978. It turned out that before homes and schools were built at Love Canal, it was originally the site of an abandoned canal. In the 1940s and 50s, the site became an industrial dumping ground. Over 22,000 tons of toxic waste were carelessly buried beneath the surface by the Hooker Chemicals and Plastics Corporation. Then, in 1953, the Hooker Company covered it all with earth and sold it to the city for a steal, a single $1. The city set up a working-class community there with 100 homes and a school. Families moved in, unaware of the danger lurking right under their feet. Mysterious illnesses began to rise, but the true extent of what was going on remained hidden till 1978. That's when state officials discovered toxic chemicals leaking into basements and yards, as well as into the playground of the elementary school. President Jimmy Carter declared a state of emergency, and more than 200 families were relocated, but more than 700 were left behind. 3 years passed before the rest of the families were relocated. After that, the homes were burnt down and the land was cordoned off. A once thriving neighborhood became a ghost town. In a desperate attempt for justice, 1,300 former residents fought back, ultimately securing a $20 million settlement from the former Hooker Company and the city. Even though the cleanup was wrapped up in the late 90s, the area continued to be monitored because it was still labeled a hazardous site. North Carolina, the lost colony of Roanoke. In the summer of 1587, a group of 115 English settlers led by Governor John White arrived on Roanoke Island, eager to carve out a new life in the New World. After settling in, John said goodbye to his daughter and granddaughter. He planned to sail back to England for supplies and return, but a stormy war with Spain delayed his return for 3 grueling years. When he finally returned in 1590, the once bustling colony was eerily silent. Not a soul remained, and all he found was a single word carved into a tree, Croatoan. It was the name of a nearby island and a Native American tribe. Did the colonists seek refuge with the Croatoans, or meet a darker end? John never got an answer, and he never saw his daughter and granddaughter again. They had seemingly vanished into thin air. For centuries, the fate of the 115 English settlers who vanished in 1587 baffled many. There were many theories about what happened. Some believe they tried to sail back to England and got lost at sea. Others think they were abducted or killed. Even murmurs of cannibalism. Recently, archaeologists have found evidence that the lost colony might not have had a tragic end. Large amounts of hammer scale, tiny metal scraps left over from blacksmithing, were found in the neighboring Hatteras Island. Hammer scale hints at a European blacksmithing technique which the Croatoans likely didn't practice, suggesting that the colonists may have relocated to the Hatteras Islands and settled into living among the Croatoan Native American tribe. But there's no solid evidence that that's the case. So for now, the lost colony of Roanoke remains one of America's oldest unsolved mysteries. New Jersey, the Lindbergh baby. In the early morning hours of March 1st, 1932, the world was shaken by a chilling crime that would haunt American history: the kidnapping of Charles Lindbergh Jr., the infant son of famous aviator Charles Lindbergh and his wife Anne. Just a few months old, the baby was taken from his nursery in the family's New Jersey home. A ransom note was found on the nursery windowsill, and it had one demand for the baby's safe return: a staggering $50,000. In the weeks that followed, the Lindberghs received a dozen more ransom notes. They invariably paid the money in $10 and $20 gold certificates to a character called Dr. John Corden. They later got a note directing them to a boat named Nellie near Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts. Despite 2 thorough searches of the area, baby Charles was not found. On May 12, 1932, only 2 miles from the Lindbergh home, the lifeless body of baby Charles was discovered in a nearby woods, hidden beneath a pile of leaves. The autopsy suggested that the child had died from a blow to the head 2 months earlier. The discovery sent shockwaves through the country, and the FBI took over the investigation. But the break in the case came from the most unlikely place: a gas station. An attendant was paid in $10 gold certificates for 5 gallons of gasoline. Suspicious, they recorded the license number of the man and called the police. This led the police right to a 36-year-old German immigrant called Bruno Hauptmann. In his garage, they found a gas can with gold certificates hidden inside. Bruno's handwriting also matched that on the ransom note, but he looked nothing like the John who collected the ransom. Bruno was found guilty and given the death sentence, but he protested his innocence till his date with the electric chair. Even after Bruno was convicted and executed, people still wondered if he was just a scapegoat in a bigger conspiracy, or if he actually did it. There are plenty of conspiracy theories claiming he was framed by the police, and more people calling for DNA testing to figure out if he was really the killer. Nevada, Star Palumbo. On the morning of April 26, 2000, a young woman named Star Palumbo was spotted wandering in a restricted area of the Reno airport in Nevada, looking disoriented and terrified. The 25-year-old claimed she was searching for her younger sister, who was on the tarmac, but there was nobody there. The officer decided to drop her off near a hotel and didn't think much of it. He didn't know it yet, but it would be the last time anyone would see Star. The following day, a car was found parked illegally at the Reno airport. It was Star's car, but there was no sign of Star. Instead, they found it filled with her personal belongings: her phone, her purse, cash, and a chilling collection of notes, including emails she had sent to the White House, convinced that the government was after her. Among the items was a morbid drawing depicting a woman bound and gagged, as well as 2 books on how to change one's identity. The police believed that Star had fallen into a dark world of drugs, possibly even dabbling in prostitution to support her habit. In her final phone call home, she sounded anxious, claiming she felt someone was following her and that her phone might be tapped. 8 months after Star's disappearance, a casino owner claimed that a woman who said her name was Star had once come in looking frightened and said she was being chased. But before she could get help, Star spotted a man outside, became upset, and left with another young woman. This was the last time Star was ever seen. 20 years later, the confusing disappearance of Star Palumbo is still a mystery. North Dakota. Drew Sojan disappearance. In November 2003, the quiet town of Grand Forks in North Dakota was rocked when 22-year-old college student Drew Sojan vanished in the parking lot of the Columbia Mall. Drew had just wrapped up work for the day and bought a new purse. She was heading to her car, chatting with her boyfriend, Chris Lang, on the phone, when suddenly the line went dead. Drew's friends were expecting her at a second job later that night, but she didn't show up. Her friends called the police and reported her missing. In the mall parking lot, the police found her car, but no Drew, only a knife sheath lying near a tire. The search for the missing college student began, and they soon found evidence that whatever happened to her was not going to be good. A shoe under a bridge 25 miles from the mall. 4 days into the search, a valuable tip rolled in about a registered offender who had been seen in the area the day Drew disappeared. His name was Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., and he had a long, dark history of violence toward women dating back to 1974. Alfonso had only been released from a 23-year sentence 6 months before Drew's disappearance. Police tracked him down and found knives in his car, along with blood specks that would later be linked to Drew. He was arrested for kidnapping, and the search for Drew continued. 5 months passed before Drew's body was found and half naked in a field. Alfonso was found guilty and given the death sentence, but this was later overturned and he ended up with a life sentence. Drew's death led to a law that makes it easier for the public to track registered offenders living in their communities. Maryland, Reynolds. Edgar Allan Poe was an American writer in the 19th century who was popular for short horror stories and poems that won him fans worldwide. The only thing more intriguing than his stories is the mystery of his death. Poe had left Richmond on September 27, 1849, and was supposed to head to Philadelphia. But 10 days later, on a dreary October night, he was found wandering the streets of Baltimore, disheveled, confused, and wearing someone else's clothes. Poe was taken to Washington College Hospital where he was hallucinating and delirious, all while calling out the name Reynolds. 4 days later, he passed away. He never regained consciousness. His death was put down as being caused by congestion of the brain, and many believed that was a result of alcoholism. Sadly, no records of his death survived, but that hasn't stopped people from speculating. Some believe Poe fell victim to cooping, a gruesome election fraud tactic where victims were kidnapped, disguised, and forced to vote multiple times. Others wondered if he was simply caught in a dangerous drinking spree with old acquaintances, leading to a brutal beating. Everything from carbon monoxide poisoning to rabies has been suggested. Even tests on his hair pointed to mercury exposure, and some have hinted at questionable medical treatments. In the end, the world will probably never know what truly took Edgar Allan Poe away, or who the Reynolds he called for was, leaving the final chapter of Poe's life as another ghostly tale from a great writer, a mystery that will be solved nevermore. Iowa, the disappearance of Jody Huisentruit. Jody Huisentruit was a beloved news anchor for KIMT-TV in Mason City, Iowa. Every morning at 6 a.m., her vibrant personality lit up the screens without fail. It was a demanding work schedule that meant Jody had to be to work by 4 a.m., but every day, without fail, Jody showed up until June 27th, 1995. That day, she overslept, and the news producer called Jody to wake her up. Jody promised to be right in, and the call ended. 6 a.m. came and went without Jody. It was the first time that she didn't take the morning segment. Her concerned colleagues called the police to check on her. There was no sign of Jody at her home, and what the officers found was unsettling. Her car was in the parking lot, and there were signs of a struggle. Her belongings scattered, drag marks leading away. It was as if she had been dragged into thin air. Inside the car, the police would find a palm print that did not belong to her. As the investigation unfolded, eerie details emerged. 9 months before Jody's disappearance, she had filed a police report about a suspicious person following her in a white pickup truck. She even took up self-defense classes. The day just before her disappearance, Jody had told friends about harassing calls she had received and that she was thinking about changing her number, but she never got the chance. The police chased numerous leads, tips, and suspects over the years. The case sadly went cold. 3 decades later, the mystery of Jodi Huisentruit's disappearance that fateful morning continues to haunt residents of Mason City. Georgia, Atlanta Blood House. At 1114 Fountain Drive in Atlanta, Georgia, stands an unassuming red brick house that was built back in 1945. One of the families to stay there the longest was William and Minnie Clyde Winston. They had lived there for 22 years, raising their children, and were well into their 70s. It was an idyllic, quiet life, but that all changed on September 8th, 1987. That evening, Minnie Winston had just taken a bath and stepped out to find the floor was slick and sticky. When she looked closely, she found that the tiled floor was covered in red droplets that looked like blood. She quickly woke her husband, and the two concluded it might have been a rodent who had gotten injured. But as Willie looked around the house, he would make a shocking discovery. There was blood everywhere, on the walls, in the hallways, and even in the crawl space. But here's the catch. There was no source. No crime scene, no injuries, no body. Just a house that seemed to bleed. They called the police, and even they were left scratching their heads in confusion. The Winstons said the door into the home was locked and their security alarm did not trip. The case took a more sinister turn when it was announced that the blood samples were not animals like the Winstons thought. It was human type O blood, to be exact. It also didn't match either of the elderly residents who had type A blood. The police didn't believe there had been a homicide. They also knew houses just didn't bleed, but there were no leads to go on, and no crime had been committed, so they dropped it. But others were not satisfied. The red brick house became a sensation that was coined the House of Blood. Reporters and amateur investigators from all over the country besieged the house, trying to talk to the elderly couple, peeping through windows and calling them repeatedly. The peace and quiet the couple enjoyed was gone. Theories began to emerge. Some speculated that the Winstons might have had a motive, perhaps to get attention from their estranged children. Others floated the idea that the Winston children might have done it to get control over their parents' finances. But there are many who believe something supernatural was at play. The Winstons lived there till they passed on. Willie just 2 years after the incident, and Minnie in 2015. The house never bled again. So, was it a hoax, or had the house itself come alive in a gruesome spectacle? Alaska. Investor. On the morning of September 7th, 1982, residents in the small remote fishing village of Craig in Alaska watched in shock as a large fishing vessel called the Investor was engulfed in flames. But the nightmare was only beginning. When the fire died down, they would find the charred bodies of the owner of the ship, Mark Colthurst, his pregnant wife, Irene, their 2 young children, and 4 deckhands between the ages of 18 and 19. At first, the police thought it was an accident caused by electrical faults. Then they found out that all the adults had been shot to death, and the fire was an attempt to destroy evidence. It was a tragic end to a group that had been ashore just hours earlier celebrating Mark's birthday. The police believed that the killer crept aboard wielding a .22 caliber weapon prepared for a bloodbath. Several fishermen recalled seeing an unfamiliar young man navigating the boat into a secluded bay barely visible from the town. But he had waved casually at them and they didn't think much of it. There, he tried to sink the boat, but the boat, which was described as the Cadillac of the fishing vessel world, just would not sink. So he decided to set it on fire before making his escape. But finding out how it was done was one thing, finding the killer was another. Investigators initially focused on 24-year-old John Peel, a former crew member who had clashed with Mark before getting fired. He had been seen buying gasoline the day before the fire, and a couple of witnesses also spotted him driving the skiff from the Investor. John was arrested and tried, but was acquitted due to insufficient evidence, leaving the case unsolved and the public to speculate. One theory is that the boat was used to smuggle from Seattle and it could have been a drug deal gone wrong, but there's no evidence of this. Many believe the person behind the murder was someone close to the family and could be identified by the children. As of today, the police have closed the case, making the Investor killings one of the worst unsolved mass murder cases in Alaska. Montana, slain for inspiring his fellow men. In the dark annals of labor history, few stories are as chilling as that of Frank Little. In 1917, World War I was escalating and there was a huge demand for copper. Mining companies like the Anaconda Copper Mining Company were laughing to the bank, to the detriment of the health and safety of their workers. Things finally came to a head on June 8, 1917, after a mine disaster killed 168 miners. Frustrated and fed up, miners immediately went on strike, and the atmosphere in Butte grew tense as both sides refused to budge. Enter Frank Little, suffering from a broken ankle but armed with a voice that could rally the masses. He arrived in Butte in July 1917, ready to ignite the flames of revolution. Frank was a union organizer and a prominent figure in the Radical Industrial Workers of the World, IWW. He arrived in Butte, Montana, with a mission to fight for the rights of the miners. Frank hit the ground running, connecting with strike organizers and union leaders, giving them new strategies to use in the strike. But just 2 weeks into his stay, a group of masked men descended upon his boarding house. They dragged him from his bed, tying him to a car bumper, and paraded him through the streets like a macabre trophy. Little's lifeless body was later discovered hanging from a railroad bridge. A cryptic note was pinned to his body, followed by the numbers 3, 7, and 77. It was a number that warned people that they would face vigilantism if they did not back off. No one was ever arrested for Frank's gruesome murder. Many suspected the Anaconda Company played a role in his lynching. The government also cracked down on unions and even arrested members of Frank's family. Having his picture was enough to put you in trouble. That didn't stop Frank from becoming a martyr for the labor movement, and his gravesite in Butte is a landmark. The patch for the Montana Highway Patrol is also adorned with the numbers 3, 7, and 77 in honor of his memory. Wisconsin, making a murder. On October 31st, 2005, 25-year-old photographer Teresa Halbach visited Stephen Avery's auto salvage yard and went missing. Days later, her remains were found, and the police found evidence that ominously pointed to the very man she had come to see, Stephen Avery. Things like his blood in her car key found in his bedroom, a bullet fragment with her DNA on it, and her charred bones were found in a fire pit behind Avery's trailer. Details that seemed damning. Teresa had also been to the salvage yard before. That time, Stephen had opened the door in his towel. He also went on to request for hers specifically. On the day she went to the salvage yard, he called her 3 times. 2 of those times, he had hidden his number. All of this made Stephen the prime suspect in her disappearance and death. The only problem was, the suspect was the man himself. Just 2 years before Stephen had been released from jail after DNA testing exonerated him for an assault and attempted murder he had already served 18 years for. If anyone had an axe to grind with Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office, it was Stephen, and he was suing them for $32 million. This had some people thinking that Stephen was being framed by the county to hurt his case. Another fly in the ointment was Stephen's 16-year-old nephew, Brendan Dacey. He became entangled in the horror when he confessed to being involved. But the chilling interrogation tactics used against him raised eyebrows. For one, Brendan had a low IQ that bordered on intellectual disability. He was also interrogated without a parent or attorney present. During questioning, the detectives would manipulate him into confessing to heinous acts he later recanted. His confession was also riddled with contradictions. Despite the inconsistencies, Brendan was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Many believe that he is innocent, but he has exhausted his appeals. As for Stephen Avery, he settled for $400,000 to fund his court case. He was found guilty and was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility for release. But this story isn't over yet. In January 2016, a documentary on both men called Making a Murderer was released on Netflix, and it exposed more conflicting details in the case, like how two jurors had close connections with Manitowoc County. One juror even claimed to have been intimidated into turning in a guilty verdict. 2 decades on, public opinions about Brendan's involvement and Stephen's innocence or guilt is still widely debated. No one can fully agree if justice has been served or not. Level 4. Hawaii, Sarah Joe. The Sarah Joe was a 17-foot, 85-horsepower motorboat that belonged to Robert Malayakini in Maui, Hawaii. The boat was named from the first names of Robert's mother and father. On the morning of February 11, 1979, Robert's brother Ralph borrowed the boat from his brother. He and his 4 friends, Peter Hanchett, Benjamin Kalama, Scott Mormon, and Patrick Wozner, planned to give their jobs at a construction site a miss and instead go fishing. It was a clear day, the sea was calm, and they wanted to make the most of it. They got beer, soft drinks, snacks, loaded a cooler with ice for any fish they caught, and at 10 a.m., the group headed out. But at 1 p.m., the wind changed directions, the first sign of an approaching storm. Ralph's father and several others went to the shore to try and wave them in, but there was no sign of the Sarah Joe. They weren't too concerned at first. Ralph was a professional fisherman, and between them, the group had more than 50 years of seagoing experience. Then, the storm rolled in. Residents would describe it as the worst one in 50 years. Several fishing boats had returned, but not the Sarah Joe. At 5 p.m., the Coast Guard was called in. For the next 5 days, helicopters and planes flew over the ocean trying to locate the Sarah Joe. Volunteers combed the shores of neighboring islands in case they had made it there, but there was no trace of the boat or the 5 men. They had vanished. For 9 years, the question of what happened to them loomed over the island. Each year, on the date they disappeared, family and friends gathered on the beach to remember them. But then, on September 9th, 1988, 2,000 miles away, John Naughton was on a wildlife expedition in the Marshall Islands with his crew when he spotted a small boat washed ashore. It turned out to be the Sarah Joe. A few yards from the wreck, they found a makeshift grave of coral rocks and a wooden cross. The grave was excavated, and through dental records, the body was identified as one of the 5 missing men, Scott Mormon. There was no sign of foul play. Another bizarre discovery was a blank pad of papers with alternating slips of tinfoil material that was buried with Scott, which only added another layer of mystery to an already troubling case. It's believed to be part of a Chinese burial ritual representing money and fortune in the next life known as joss paper. One theory is that Chinese fishermen fishing illegally in the area stumbled on the boat with Scott's body in it and brought them to shore before burying him. None of the other 4 men have ever been found. Tennessee, Caitlin Ledbetter. Up until May 2nd, 2021, Caitlin Ledbetter was described as a quiet, level-headed 26-year-old woman. She shared a home in Overton County, Tennessee, with her father and his girlfriend, Crystal Tyson, both heavy drug users. In the early hours of that morning, Caitlin had a terrible row with her father's girlfriend. Then, wearing nothing but pajamas and with no shoes on, Caitlin jumped out of her bedroom window, sprinting barefoot into the dense woods nearby, a rugged terrain with steep hills and thick underbrush. She has not been heard from since. A week after her disappearance, police stormed the woods with tracker dogs. They caught Caitlin's scent and were able to trace her to the edge of the road. Then they lost it. But the police felt she was a consenting adult and there were no signs of anything suspicious going on, so they pretty much dropped the case. Then, 3 months later, on August 2021, firemen and police were once more at the Ledbetter home. Scott had called that his home was on fire and one person was trapped inside, Scott's girlfriend, Crystal. The house was completely destroyed, and Crystal was found dead in the basement. No autopsy was completed, so it's not quite sure if her death was suspicious or not, but alarm bells were going off among Caitlin's loved ones. Family members mentioned that the text they received before Caitlin left the house did not sound like her. Caitlin's sister also noted her father, who was a heavy user, had to be urged to file a missing persons report. Yet when the family rallied together to search for Caitlin, Scott came back with his shirt off even though it was cold and cried for almost an hour. There also seemed to be a suspicious relationship between Caitlin's boyfriend and her father. It was 9 months into Caitlin's disappearance before law enforcement conducted a proper search of the property. By then, the home was gone and any potential evidence with it, along with the prime witness, was dead. As if that wasn't bad enough, crucial evidence, the texts from Caitlin, mysteriously disappeared. Caitlin has never been seen again. There are those who believe that Scott played a role in her disappearance, as well as in Crystal's death. South Carolina. Dale Dinwiddie. On September 24, 1992, Hardin Street in the popular Five Points district of Columbia, South Carolina, became the last known location of Dale Dinwiddie before she dropped off the face of the earth. Dale was a 23-year-old art student at the University of South Carolina. That evening, she and a group of friends went to the school's Williams-Brice Stadium for a concert by the Irish rock band U2. The show ended shortly after 11, and Dale and her friends headed to a nightclub in 5 Points called Jungle Gyms. There, the group got separated, and they lost sight of Dale. By 1 a.m., they were ready to call it in. Dale's parents lived nearby, and when they didn't see her, they believed she had already left. They were wrong. It wasn't until the next day that Dale's parents realized she hadn't come home and called the police. They found out that a few minutes after her friends left, Dale had shown up and asked a bouncer about her friend's whereabouts. When he told her that he didn't know, she waited around for 15 more minutes before heading out into the night. Convinced that they were dealing with an abduction, the police launched a massive search, but they never found a crime scene or any evidence. The case went cold. Dale has never been seen since that fateful night. 30 years on, Dale Dinwiddie's disappearance remains one of South Carolina's most high-profile unsolved mysteries. Oklahoma, the Jamison family. On the 8th of October 2009, Bobby Jamison, his wife Cheryl Lynn, their 6-year-old daughter Madison, and the family dog Maisie left their home in Eufaula, Oklahoma. They were headed to the Samboa Mountains, a place that Bobby and Cheryl Lynn had been talking about buying a 40-acre property there and living off-grid. But none of them would be heard from ever again. An extensive search was launched, and days later their family truck was found on a dirt road about an hour's drive away from where they lived. Inside the car, they found the family dog, starved and dehydrated. But there was no sign of the family, and no sign that they had been forced out of the vehicle. Instead, they found $32,000 in cash, family IDs and wallets, a GPS system, Cheryl Lynn's purse, and Bobby's phone. There was also an 11-page letter Cheryl Lynn had written airing all her problems with Bobby. Despite extensive searches, the Jamison family could not be found, and the mystery of what could have happened to them haunted many. 4 years passed. Then, in November 2013, some hunters in the area where the Jamisons' truck was abandoned stumbled onto some human remains laid out neatly side by side, all face down. The remains would later be identified as those of Bobby, Cheryl Lynn, and Madison. The missing persons case was now a homicide. The police opened an investigation, and what they learned raised more questions than answers. Before they disappeared, both Bobby and Cheryl Lynn had been acting very strangely. Bobby had told his pastor he was seeing spirits on the roof of their home and asked for special bullets to take them out. He also told the pastor that Cheryl Lynn had bought a satanic Bible and was writing witchcraft phrases on the walls. Inside the house, the police would find a hit list that Bobby kept of everyone that had offended him. The night before they disappeared, surveillance footage captured Bobby and Sherilyn loading their truck without saying a word to each other, almost like they were in a trance. Sherilyn was seen putting a handgun in a brown briefcase and loading into the truck. But this was never found. The autopsy of their remains didn't reveal much because their bodies were so badly decomposed. Some speculate the family stumbled into something sinister. Others have hinted about their deaths being cult-related or some type of suicide. But no weapons were found on the scene. The bizarre events surrounding the death of the Jamison family remains a haunting mystery to this day. New Hampshire, Mara Murray. On February 9, 2004, 21-year-old Mara Murray was behind the wheels of her car headed to New Hampshire when it went off the road and slammed into a tree. A concerned bystander reported the crash, but when the police showed up, Mara was long gone, taking both her cell phone and credit card and bank card with her. Inside the car, the police saw a box of red wine and signs that Mara could have been drinking prior to the crash. So it made sense when the 911 caller revealed that she had begged him not to call 911. Another witness, a bus driver, said he saw Mara and offered her a ride, but she declined. The police did not suspect foul play. Before Mara left the University of Massachusetts Amherst, she was studying nursing. They found out she had told her college professor she would be away for a while because there was a death in her family. She had also packed up her dormitory room and withdrawn $280 with her ATM before heading out. But Mara's family was not convinced. For one, there was no death in the family. She also hadn't told any of them she was headed to New Hampshire. Her fiancé also said he received a call from her number a day after the accident, but all he heard was her breathing on the line. The call could not be traced. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years without a single trace of Mara or her belongings being found. Her family was now convinced that something sinister happened to her. 7 years into her disappearance, a creepy YouTube video surfaced featuring a man laughing ominously titled, "Happy Anniversary 112 Dirtbag," a phrase linked to Mara's case. Investigators tracked down the man, but he had no solid connection to her disappearance. It has now been over 2 decades since Mara was last seen, and questions about what truly happened on that fateful night still remain. Massachusetts, the Boston Strangler. Beginning from June 1962, Boston was gripped in fear of a chilling figure that would be known as the Boston Strangler. He was an infamous serial killer linked to the deaths of 13 women, all found in their homes, often with the same eerie patterns. He would typically target elderly women living alone and gain their trust to enter their homes. Once inside, he would commit horrific acts before ending their lives. At first, all of his victims were middle-aged and elderly. Then something changed. Between September and November of 1962, the Boston Strangler just stopped killing. Then, in December, he started again, but this time, he was targeting victims in their late teens and early 20s. With each brutal murder, the police scrambled to piece together clues, but the killer seemed always one step ahead. Women avoided walking alone, and families installed deadbolts and security systems in a desperate bid for safety. At the same time, another sinister figure was operating in Boston. He was called the Green Man because he wore green work clothes. This criminal would break into homes belonging to women, tie them up, and assault them. One of his victims was able to provide a detailed description that led the police right to Albert DeSalvo. In a strange twist, not only did he confess to the assaults and burglary, he also claimed to be the Boston Strangler. Albert's confession sent shockwaves through the city, but as investigators dug deeper, they began to question his involvement. All the evidence connecting Albert to the Boston Strangler murders were circumstantial, and his descriptions of the crimes and scenes just didn't match up. In the end, he was never charged with the Boston Strangler murders, but he was found guilty of the assaults and burglaries as the Green Man and sentenced to life behind bars. Public opinion tilted between those who were convinced he was the real deal and others who believed that Albert was just seeking notoriety. Whatever the case, murder by the Strangler stopped after DeSalvo was arrested, but the case was never closed, and many believe that the true killer may never have been caught. As for Albert, he was killed in prison a day after he sent word to his doctor that he had something to tell him about the Boston Strangler murders. A coincidence or someone tying up loose ends? We might never know. South Dakota, Tina and Tom. One morning in June of 1994, workers at a wood processing plant on the outskirts of Rapid City, South Dakota, resumed work to a shocking scene. The body of one of their colleagues, 29-year-old Tom Cooter, was crushed beneath the wheels of his own forklift. Tom's wife was convinced that he had been murdered, but the police were convinced that something more sinister was at play. Just days earlier on June 24th, one of Tom's acquaintances, Tina Marcotte, had vanished without a trace. She had been working a late shift when her tire blew out, leaving her stranded and alone. In a moment of desperation, Tina called her best friend, Vicky Riddle, to pick her up. Before Vicky got a chance to reply, Tina told her that a car had pulled up and she was going to check who it was. When Tina came back on the line, she told Vicky not to bother coming and that an old friend called Tom had offered to give her a ride home. That call would be the last anyone ever heard from Tina. The next morning, Vicky called Tom Cooter to ask him if Tina had gotten home, but Tom denied giving her a ride home. Some hours later, Tom would come to Vicky's house with Tina's boyfriend, Patrick. Tom continued to deny seeing Tina. He even tried to deflect, saying Vicky was drunk. In the end, they decided to report Tina as a missing person. The police were alarmed to find out that her car tire had not blown out. It had been slashed. Suspicion quickly turned to Tom. When questioned, he maintained that he hadn't given Tina a ride or been anywhere near the area. He told the police that he had gone to a softball game, dropped a friend off, then his car broke down and he had been out fixing it for hours. But when the police spoke to his wife, she told them a suspicious detail. When Tom got home, he had immediately washed all his clothes, down to his shoelaces. He also didn't mention his car breaking down. The police were now convinced they had their man. 3 days after Tina's disappearance, they confronted Tom and told him blood had been found in his car and would be matching it to Tina's. The next day, Tom was found dead. The police believed that Tom had seen the writing on the wall, so he loaded a ton of lumber on his forklift and set it in motion. Then he got out and positioned himself in the machine's path. 16 months after Tina went missing, her body was discovered beneath a woodpile at Tom's workplace. She had been hit on the head. Detectives continued to investigate Tina and Tom's case for several years, but both are now considered closed. The police believe Tom was Tina's killer. They also found blood on Tom's shoe that matched DNA collected from one of Tina's daughters. But Tom's wife continued to protest his innocence. She is convinced that there's an unknown killer out there who got away with murdering Tom. Illinois, the Tylenol murders. In the early hours of September 29, 1982, 12-year-old Mary Kellerman woke up with a sore throat and a runny nose. So her parents did what any parent would do. They gave her a Tylenol capsule. Little did they know that they had just handed her a death sentence. A few hours later, Mary's parents were shocked to find her dead, and they couldn't make sense of how a seemingly harmless cold could lead to such a tragedy. They didn't know it yet, but Mary wasn't alone. In the days that followed, several others in the Chicago area, including a 27-year-old man and a 31-year-old woman, also lost their lives after taking Tylenol. Several people had died before 2 firefighters in the Windy City connected their deaths to Tylenol. As the news spread, panic set in. Authorities quickly discovered the grim truth. Someone had tampered with the capsules and laced them with cyanide. So far, all the victims were in the Chicago area, but the manufacturers of the drug couldn't be certain the tamperings were limited to the area, and a nationwide recall was ordered. As stores rushed to pull the once trusted product from their shelves, the FBI launched a massive investigation to unmask the killer. They soon uncovered letters sent to Johnson & Johnson demanding $1 million to stop the killings. The man behind the letters was James William Lewis. After discovering that James had several books on poisons, including cyanide, they were convinced James was their man. They also found that the extortion letters had been written long before news of the tampering broke out. James admitted he had written the letters, but insisted he didn't lace the pills. The police didn't have enough to charge him with the murders. In the end, he was found guilty of extortion and served 12 years of a 20-year sentence. Despite the best efforts of the FBI, no one was ever charged with the Tylenol murders. But the deaths shook up the entire pharmaceutical industry and led to the use of tamper-proof packaging. California, Golden State Killer. In the 1970s and 80s, the state of California was hit with a series of burglaries, violent assaults, and killings. The burglaries were believed to be done by a shadowy figure called the Visalia Ransacker. He was known to take trophies from the homes he burgled and go through women's underwear drawers. Then there was the original Night Stalker and the East Area Rapist, who would assault more than 40 women over a 3-year period. They were known to stalk victims and make hang-up phone calls to their homes before attacks. Surviving victims said he wore masks and tied their hands. He also spent hours in their house and would take breaks between the attack to cry or eat. At first, he targeted women who lived alone, then he escalated and began to target even couples, assaulting the females before taking the lives of both the women and their partners. These attacks were happening all over California in different jurisdictions, and the police were chasing their tails to find him. Then, in 1991, the killings and assaults stopped. But detective after detective kept pursuing leads, hoping to bring this killer to justice. Fast forward to 2001, forensic testing would connect DNA found at the scenes of the original Night Stalker attackers to that of the East Area Rapist. It was all the same man. He was also the Visalia Ransacker. The media now gave him a new name, the Golden State Killer. In 2017, investigators decided to upload the DNA profile to a genealogy database. This would lead to the arrest of 72-year-old Joseph James D'Angelo, a former police officer. The news sent shockwaves through the communities. He pleaded guilty to more than 100 crimes, including 13 killings, and was handed 12 life sentences. Level 5. Virginia, Colonial Park. Colonial Parkway is a picturesque drive and state route in Virginia with trees and scenic views. Its long stretches of road without streetlights made it a popular spot for young couples to visit. But between 1986 and 1989, this scenic route became the place that 4 young couples would breathe their last. It all started with the disappearance of Rebecca Dowski and Kathy Thomas. The 2 college students were a lesbian couple who were last seen on October 9, 1986. 3 days later, their car was found parked in a thick, dense shrubbery. Inside the car, they found the bodies of Rebecca and Kathy. There was no sign of assault, and none of their money or jewelry was taken. There wasn't much to go on except a clump of the killer's hair that had been pulled out in a struggle. A year later, on September 19th, David E. Knobling and Margaret Edwards disappeared under similar circumstances. David's car was found 2 days later with the engine and radio running and both doors open. Again, a wallet was found in the car, ruling out robbery. Days later, the bodies of David and Margaret washed up on shore. They had both been shot execution style, but Margaret had also been assaulted. The pattern was chillingly similar to Rebecca and Kathy's deaths. In April 1988, another couple, Cassandra Lee Haley and Richard Keith Call, went missing in Colonial Park, but their bodies were never found. A year later, Daniel Lauer and Anna Maria Phelps were also murdered. During the investigation, one name seemed to pop up a lot: a fisherman named Alan W. Wilmer. Several couples in Colonial Parkway recalled him confronting them. They searched his home and found handcuffs and a gun, but when he cleared the polygraph, they cut him loose. Then, in 2024, advances in DNA technology caught up with the case, and DNA evidence would link Allen to 2 of the murders at Colonial Park. He was also linked to the death of 29-year-old Teresa Howell, who had been fatally attacked outside a club back in 1989. There's not enough evidence to conclusively link him to the other killings, but many believe he was involved. Whatever the case, Allen isn't talking. He died back in 2017, taking the truth with him. Vermont, Grace and Gracie. On June 6, 1978, Michael Reap came back from work to find his wife Grace and their 5-year-old daughter Gracie were not home. Grace had left a note behind saying she was taking Gracie and leaving for good. It took 5 days of Grace's sister calling the home for Michael to finally file a report. His behavior only deepened the suspicion surrounding him, and that wasn't even all he did. 10 days after filing the missing persons report, Michael filed for divorce. 4 months after the divorce was finalized, Michael remarried Donna Rosen, the family babysitter, and a woman he had been having an affair with. While Grace's family believed that Michael had something to do with Grace and Gracie's disappearance, the authorities weren't convinced, or so it seemed. 10 years after Grace and Gracie's disappearance, the case was reopened. It would later be upgraded to a homicide. On October 21, 1996, Vermont police, the FBI, and a team of cadaver dogs were at the family's old house. By this time, Michael had sold it and moved to Florida. As the search was going on, a reporter called Michael asking if he knew why the police were digging up his former home. Michael stuck to his story, insisting that Grace and Gracie had left him. But within days, Michael was in the wind, taking only a toothbrush and cigarettes. The police didn't know that he was on the run till his son reported him missing 2 weeks later. By then, they had a theory of what had happened to Grace and Gracie. Grace had found out about Michael's affair with the babysitter, and he took her life. Their daughter Gracie might have witnessed the crime, and Michael had killed her as well. Michael was charged with both murders, but he was nowhere to be found. For the next 16 years, police believed he was on the run, but they were wrong. Back in 1997, an unknown man had abducted a man at gunpoint and then stolen his car. This led to a high-speed chase. As the cops closed in, the man pulled over on the side of the road and turned the gun on himself. For more than a decade, the man remained a John Doe. Technology finally caught up with the case in 2010, and when they ran John Doe's fingerprints, it came back with a hit: the missing Michael Rape. Despite Michael's death, the investigation remained alive as they tried to locate Grace and Gracie's body. So far, there have been 25 digs on the 10-acre property to find them. Florida, the Wick Effect. On the night of July 2nd, 1951, Mary Reeser's life came to an abrupt and eerie end in her St. Petersburg, Florida apartment in a scene straight out of a horror movie. That fateful night, it was her landlady who discovered her body the next morning. When she turned the doorknob, she noticed it was hot. She stepped inside the home and was confronted with a heap of ashes where Mary had sat. The nearby candle had melted and light switches were warped. Mary had mysteriously burned into a pile of ashes, leaving behind only a shrunken skull, part of her spine, and a foot. But here's the real kicker. Her apartment showed almost no damage. Even the sheets on her bed remained pristine. Authorities were just as baffled. Theories began to spread about spontaneous human combustion, a bizarre occurrence where someone supposedly bursts into flames without any external ignition source. Others said she had been struck by lightning. Then the FBI stepped in with a simpler explanation. Mary's death was due to the Wick effect. They believed that Mary had taken sedatives, then fallen asleep while smoking. That ended up igniting her flammable nightgown, and her body fat fueled the fire, leading to her bizarre demise. After that, her death was ruled as accidental. And yet, despite the FBI's explanation, many are convinced that something supernatural was at play at Mary's house, and her death still remains a haunting mystery to many. Minnesota. A napkin solved the case. On June 13, 1993, police in Minneapolis received calls that red water was leaking through the floor of a unit at the Horn Towers apartment complex. Officers made their way into an apartment covered in blood and quickly found the body of 35-year-old Jeannie Childs in the shower with the water running. She was wearing nothing but a pair of socks and had been attacked with a knife at least 65 times. One thing stood out to investigators: bare, bloodied footprints. Since Jeannie had on socks, it was clearly the killer's. These prints were the one bit of evidence the investigators had, but DNA testing was non-existent at the time, and the case quickly went cold, and the community lived in fear of a killer in their midst. 2 decades later, advances in forensic science reignited hopes of solving the mystery after male DNA was identified on several items that had been recovered from Jeannie's home: a comforter, towel, and a shirt. After running the DNA profile through a public genealogy database, investigators got a hit on a pair of brothers in Minnesota. One of them was a businessman called Jerry Westrom, a married man with 2 grown children that had a criminal record for soliciting a teenager. At the time of Jeannie's death, he had lived in the area. Investigators began to tail him and struck gold when Jerry discarded a napkin at a hockey game. His DNA turned out to be a match to the male DNA they had found at the scene, and he was arrested. The bloodied footprints that had been left behind at the scene were also critical to prove that he was there at the time of Jeannie's murder, and after careful examination, his footprint was a match as well. Thanks to a discarded napkin and a bloodied footprint, Jerry Westrom was found guilty of Jeannie's murder. He will be 86 years old before he's eligible for parole. Connecticut. Jennifer Dulos. On the morning of May 24, 2019, Jennifer Dulos dropped her children off at the New Canaan Country School in Connecticut before heading off to face the rest of her day. But it was the last moment anyone would see Jennifer. She never showed up for any of her appointments for the day, and no one could reach her. At 7 p.m. that night, Jennifer was reported missing. As investigators delved into her disappearance, they uncovered evidence suggesting foul play. Bloodstains were found in her garage and on a vehicle parked inside her home, while her SUV was discovered 3 miles away, abandoned and without any sign of her. But everyone they talked to named the same suspect, Fotis Dulos, Jennifer's estranged husband. The two were embroiled in a contentious divorce that had turned increasingly hostile. Within weeks, authorities charged Fotis Dulos and his girlfriend, Michelle Troconis, with tampering with evidence and hindering prosecution. They had found surveillance footage that captured them discarding several garbage bags in different locations. Garbage bags that had a shirt, bra, and zip ties, all covered in Jennifer's blood. It's believed that he and Michelle had tailed her to the school and waited till she dropped the kids and followed her home before attacking her. Investigators now had enough to prove that Jennifer was dead, and even without a body, he was charged with murder. Fotis maintains that he was innocent, but shortly after he was charged, he took his own life, leaving his girlfriend in the hot seat. Michelle Troconis was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and sentenced to 20 years behind bars. Like Fotis, she continues to maintain her innocence. As of now, Jennifer Dulos has not been found, but her family continues to hold on to hope that her body will eventually be discovered. Level 6. Michigan, the Good Heart Murders. Around 3 a.m. on March 26, 2018, a camper near the Pacific Ocean beach in Michigan was basking in nature when he heard the sound of a revving car engine, tires crunching on gravel, and cries for help. It was the sound of Jennifer Hart's SUV falling off a 100-foot cliff, taking the lives of her wife, Sarah, and their 6 adopted children. At first, the crash was reported as an accident, but investigators became suspicious after noticing that there were no skid marks to suggest a last-minute attempt to stop. An autopsy on Jennifer showed she had been drinking, while Sarah had high levels of Benadryl in her system. The children also had high levels of Benadryl in their system. It was looking less and less like an accident. As investigators looked more into Jennifer and Sarah, a troubling picture emerged. Behind the facade of happiness they shared on social media, both women had been reported for neglect and mistreatment of the children. Back in 2010, Sarah was found guilty of misdemeanor domestic assault after she confessed to harming one of her daughters. In 2017, one of the children had even jumped out from the second-story window at her house and run over to a neighbor's house, begging them to take her away. Most recently, in March 2018, one of their sons had gone to a neighbor's house complaining that they had not been fed. The neighbor had called Child Protective Services, but when they showed up at the home on March 23rd, nobody was home, and they left a business card. The next day, the CPS officers returned to the home, but Jennifer and Sarah had already left with the children, never to be seen again. In the days leading up to the crash, the couple had researched methods for taking their lives online. A troubling picture was emerging. Jennifer and Sarah had made a suicide pact that would end the lives of both they and their 6 children. The body of one of the kids, Devontae, who captured Hart's in a viral photo hugging a police officer during a protest, was never found and was declared legally dead. In the wake of this tragedy, the community mourned the lives of those children who had lived in darkness while smiling for family snapshots. Missouri, Christian Ferguson. On June 11, 2003, DeJuan Ferguson called 911 from a payphone with an alarming story to tell. Someone had stolen his car with his 9-year-old son Christian inside. The police eventually found the car 5 miles from where it had been stolen, but Christian was not with it. Christian suffered from a rare disorder that left him unable to talk or move. He needed constant care and life-sustaining medication. Without them, he would be dead in 48 hours. The authorities ramped up their search for the boy, but what unfolded next felt like something out of a chilling horror story. It started when Christian's mother, who didn't have custody, told officers that in the months leading up to Christian's disappearance, he had lost weight and seemed to be in poor health. Christian's brother also told investigators that he had seen Christian lying unresponsive before DeJuan wrapped him in a blanket and placed him in his car. Then they found something ominous in the home, Christian's feeding tube with tool marks indicating that it had been forcibly removed. It turned out that for a 2-year period, DeJuan had neglected his son and wasn't giving him food or medication. They believed he had done this intentionally to kill the boy. In a twist that sent shivers down spines, DeJuan Ferguson was charged with his son's murder. In July 2022, he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Christian's body has never been found. Texas, the killing fields. In southeast Texas, there's a haunting stretch nestled along the Interstate 45. It's known as the Texas Killing Fields and is the place where the bodies of at least 34 young women and girls have been discovered since the early 1970s, buried in shallow graves or discarded along the roadside. It began in the early 70s when teenagers and young women aged between 12 and 25 seemingly vanished without a trace. Many of them shared eerily similar physical traits, which raised alarm among local authorities that they were dealing with a serial killer. Over the next year, the truth emerged that they were not dealing with a single serial killer, but several, who now saw the killing field as the perfect place to kill a person. Over the years, some of these serial killers have been identified. There was Edward Harold Bell, a known exhibitionist who was linked to several victims, but he was never charged due to lack of evidence. Then, Mark Stallings, a convicted kidnapper who confessed to killing Donna Prudhomme. and was linked to several others. Another was William Reese. He got caught after a failed abduction and was linked to the murders of 4 women. And then there's Clyde Edwin Hedrick. He had been implicated in multiple cases, including the death of Ellen Beeson, as well as his neighbor's daughter, Laura Miller. But only a handful of them would serve time for the murders because of lack of evidence. Today, despite decades of investigation, the killers of some of the victims have not been identified, and many murders have remained unsolved. Level 7. New Mexico, West Mesa Bone Collector. On the night of February 2nd, 2009, Christine Ross was out walking her dog in the West Mesa area of Albuquerque, New Mexico. When she got to an abandoned construction site they stopped at every day, she took off the dog's leash so it could have a run. But then, the canine returned with something unexpected: a big bone. Curious and a bit unsettled, Christine snapped a picture and sent it to her sister, who happened to be a nurse. Both women were alarmed to find out it was a human femur. Just like that, what started as a mundane walk turned into a discovery that would shock the community. The authorities took over the scene and soon unearthed the skeletal remains of 11 women and an unborn child, all buried in shallow graves. They had gone missing between 2001 and 2005. Most of the victims were young women whose lives had taken difficult turns and had become involved in high-risk lifestyles like drug use and working the streets. So, their disappearances had either gone unnoticed or were ignored because of their high-risk lifestyle. Investigators were convinced that the same lifestyle was why they had been targeted, and quickly narrowed down on 2 prime suspects. Lorenzo Montoya, a man with a violent past who lived just a few miles away from the site. He was known for picking up street workers, but interrogating him would be a problem. In 2006, Lorenzo had attacked a street worker and her boyfriend killed him. That left Joseph Blia, a man who was known to break into homes and assault teenagers. He was also known to frequent prostitutes, and his DNA linked him to the murder of one. Joseph denied being the West Mesa Bone Collector, but in 2015 he was sentenced to 90 years in prison after he was connected to the assault of 4 women, one of them a teenager. 15 years later, the investigations into who the West Mesa Bone Collector is remains open. Alabama, Natalie Holloway. On the night of May 29, 2005, Natalie Holloway, an 18-year-old from Mountain Brook, Alabama, was enjoying the last day of her trip to Aruba in celebration of her graduation with 150 classmates. She was at a bar called Carlos and Charlie's with friends, but when the bar closed, Natalie was seen getting in the back of a white car with 3 men. Natalie's friends assumed she was getting a lift to the hotel, but in the morning when the group showed up at the airport to fly back home, Natalie was not there. Her friends pointed out the 3 men she had left with, 17-year-old Joran Vandersloot and the Kalpoe brothers. They told the police that they had dropped her off at her hotel and a security guard there had approached her. The guards were interrogated but later released. The police were convinced that Joran and the Kalpoe brothers knew something, and they were arrested, but a few months later they were released. 2 years later, all 3 were arrested again. This time, they were charged with the voluntary manslaughter of Natalie Holloway. But again, just 1 month later, the charges were dropped and all 3 were cut loose. In the years that followed, Joran made several false confessions, spinning wild tales as he appeared on TV stations. In one version, Natalie had overdosed. In another, he claimed that he had trafficked her for $10,000. Another time, he said she had used and fallen from a balcony. Then, in 2010, Joran contacted Natalie's parents and offered to reveal where Natalie was buried for a price. After contacting the FBI, the parents paid $15,000 into his account and had their lawyer hand him $10,000 in cash. It turned out to be bogus. There was no body. This time, Joran's prank got him charged with wire fraud and extortion. At the same time, 5 years to the day of Natalie's disappearance, the body of a 21-year-old college student, Stephanie Flores Ramirez, was found in a hotel room registered to Joran's name in Peru. Surveillance footage also put him at the scene, and several witnesses recalled seeing them playing together at a casino. Joran was found in Chile with a pile of his bloody clothes. He was returned to Peru and confessed to Stephanie's murder. He tried to recant his statement, but the judge did not agree, and he was sentenced to 23 years behind bars. But this bizarre case isn't over yet. In 2023, Joran was extradited to the U.S. for his wire fraud and extortion trial. 4 months later, Joran pleaded guilty to the extortion charges. As part of the plea deal, he also had to reveal what happened to Natalie. In a chilling turn of events, he admitted that he had killed Natalie after she rejected his advances, then tossed her body into the ocean. However, the statute of limitations in Aruba had long passed, and it's unlikely he would face justice. For now, he would complete his sentence for Stephanie's murder in Peru in 2043, after which he will serve a 20-year sentence in the U.S. for extortion. Natalie's body has never been found. Arizona. Robert Fisher, FBI's most wanted. In the morning of April 11, 2021, a neighborhood in Scottsdale, Arizona watched in horror as a powerful explosion erupted at the Fisher family home. When the fire was finally put out, firefighters found the lifeless bodies of Robert Fisher's wife, Mary, and their 2 children, Brittany and Bobby Jr. They were still in their beds, like they died in their sleep. It seemed like a tragic accident, until autopsies brought the chilling truth to light. Each of them had been attacked with a knife before the fire even started. Mary also had a gunshot wound. Notably absent was the seemingly devoted husband and father, Robert. But family and friends revealed that their marriage was on the rocks. After Robert confessed he was having an affair, and Mary was making plans to divorce him, something that Robert was firmly against. The night before the arson, neighbors recalled hearing a loud argument on the night of the murder, and investigators believe that Robert snapped and took out his family. To destroy the evidence, he had disconnected the gas line to create a deadly explosion using a candle as a timer to cover his tracks. Then, he took the family dog and drove off in his wife's car. Shortly before 11 p.m., an ATM captured him withdrawing the maximum amount of $280. And it was the last time he was seen. A massive manhunt was launched to find Robert. 10 days later, Mary's SUV was found abandoned near a remote area known for its rugged terrain and hidden caves. The family dog had been left behind in the car. At this point, Robert became one of the 10 most wanted fugitives on the FBI's list. Almost 2 decades later, he is still at large, and in 2021, the FBI announced that he would be removed from the list. Some believe that he took his own life in one of the caves where he abandoned Mary's car, but Robert was known for his survivalist skills, and there are many who believe Robert is still out there on the run. Oregon. Shoe Fetish Slayer. 2 decades before the fear of the shoe fetish slayer had women scrambling for safety, a young Jerry Brudos stumbled on a pair of high-heeled women's shoes in a junkyard and brought them home. Jerry's mother was disgusted and told him to take it back to the dump. Instead, Jerry hid them. When his mother found the shoes, she burned them, but it was too late. Something sinister had taken root in him. From there, Jerry's fascination with women's shoes spiraled out of control. Not only did he steal shoes, he also started taking women's underwear. By the time he hit his teenage years, the innocent fascination had morphed into something darker. At 17, he attacked a girl and abducted her. His plan was to keep her in a hole he had dug and take naked pictures of her, but Jerry was caught in time. He was sent to a psychiatric hospital where he told doctors about his disturbing fantasies of keeping women as sex slaves. Yet somehow they deemed him fit to return to society and tagged his behavior as boys being boys. From there, Jerry seemed to settle down. He married Darcy Metzler, had 2 kids, and neighbors saw him as a top dude who didn't drink, smoke, or swear. But behind closed doors, Jerry's wife became the brunt of his depraved fantasies, and he would often demand that she pose for him in nothing but high heels. For a time, Darcy complied with his demands till she put her foot down. At first, Jerry got his rocks off by creeping through the neighborhood looking for women's shoes and underwear, but it wasn't enough. In 1967, he finally snapped. One evening, he was on a walk when he noticed a woman's shoes. Jerry began to follow the woman and would stalk her to her home. After she had gone to sleep, Jerry broke into the house and assaulted her before making off with her shoes. She was lucky to survive, but his next victim wasn't. 19-year-old Linda Slauson was selling encyclopedias door to door when she showed up at Jerry's home. Under the pretext of buying one, Jerry lured her into the home and killed her. Then he cut off her foot and stored it in his freezer, using it as a model for his stolen shoes, before tying her body to a car engine and dumping her body in a river. Over the next 18 months, Jerry would kill 4 women in increasing levels of brutality. A couple of times he would even sleep with their bodies before disposing of them in the river, but eventually, one of his victims' bodies was found in the river. After a search, the police found another woman's body. Investigators began to talk to young women in the area and soon heard stories of a Vietnam vet. One woman said he had told her about bodies in the river and even talked about strangling her. The women led the police right to Jerry Bruto. After interrogating him, they searched his home and uncovered a macabre museum of horrors in his garage, including photographs of his victims and body parts he had kept as trophies. Jerry confessed to all 4 murders, the attempted kidnappings, and earlier assaults. He was given 3 life sentences for the murders of all his victims except one, 19-year-old Linda Slauson. Her body was never found, and all that remains of her was the leg he had cut off and kept. Utah. Susan Powell. On December 7th, 2009, Susan Powell's mother and sister reported her missing. The 28-year-old mother of 2 had not dropped off her kids at daycare that morning. She also never showed up at work. Fearing the worst, the police went into the home. There were no signs of Susan, her husband Joshua, or their 2 sons. By late afternoon, the family was rallying together to begin searching for the family when Joshua appeared with the boys, but there was no sign of Susan. Joshua told the police that he had taken the boys on a late-night camping trip and left Susan alone at home. The story raised eyebrows, especially since he didn't mention this plan to anyone, not even his boss. Like that wasn't suspicious enough, when police checked the camping site Joshua described, there was no evidence anyone had been there. The case took on a more sinister edge after police searched the Powells' home and found traces of Susan's blood on the floor. They also found a video where Susan talked about fearing for her life. At the bank where she worked, investigators also found a safety deposit box with a handwritten will. In it, Susan had written about her marriage as well as her concerns that Joshua had taken $1 million life insurance policy on her. When the police spoke to the kids, one of them said Susan had gone on the camping trip with them but didn't return. One of their teachers also reported that they said Susan was dead. Another time, one of the boys drew a vehicle with 3 people in it and said that his mother was in the trunk. By now, the investigators were pretty sure that Joshua had something to do with Susan's disappearance, and he wasn't doing anything to quell their suspicions. While Susan's family searched for her, Joshua liquidated her retirement accounts and canceled her appointments. He never once showed up at any of their searches. But Joshua wasn't the only person of interest. There were whispers about Joshua's father, Stephen Powell, who seemed to have had a weird fixation on her. He even went on TV interviews and would talk about Susan making passes at him. The police searched the home that Stephen now shared with Joshua and his 2 sons. They found several videotapes he had made in secret of young girls and women, including Susan. In one video, he was seen smelling Susan's underwear and even kept a journal where he wrote about her obsessively. Stephen was arrested for voyeurism and crimes against children. This led to the state stepping in, and Joshua lost custody of the 2 boys to Susan's parents and was granted weekly supervised visits. On February 5th, 2012, the situation took a tragic turn. It started with a 911 call from a social worker. She had taken the Powell boys to see Joshua on a supervised visit, but just as she got to the door, Joshua took the boys and wouldn't let her into the house. Before the police could show up, the house exploded. In the aftermath, it was discovered that Joshua had taken the lives of his 2 sons before setting the house on fire, and he died in the explosion. In 2013, police concluded their active investigation. As far as they were concerned, Joshua had killed her. 2 decades on, despite extensive searches, Susan's body was never found.